leading Britain's conversation with Nigel Farage.
The NHS is leaking money to private companies in contracts known as PFIs. This was about the building and running of brand new hospitals. It came in back in 1997. It was a Blairite initiative. And over the course of the last few years, last 6 years, £831 million has gone to private companies. The Department of Health defends it, saying it's only 3% of the NHS budget after all. But there is a big debate here. What is the role for the private sector in the National Health Service? Or does privatisation undermine the very existence of a National Health Service free at the point of use? Please call me on 0345 6060 973 to tell me what you think about this. And yes, you're right, it's me. It's Nigel Farage, and I'm standing in this week for Ian Dale. I'm here tonight from 4 to 7. I'll be here all the way through until Friday. And in a very packed show this evening, we'll be bringing you the latest from Hurricane Harvey, which has now moved into, as predicted, Louisiana. We'll be talking about the Scottish Labour leader standing down and perhaps examining what the reasons behind that might be. We will, of course, unavoidably be talking about North Korea, and indeed Prime Minister May is in Japan today, who, if you remember, 48 hours ago had a missile fired over their space, over Hokkaido Island, leading to, for the first time since World War II, air raid sirens going off over large parts of Japan. But first, are you old enough? If you're over 30, you will be. Do you remember this?
Get better.
Oh, do you remember it? There was John Prescott jigging, and there was Kinnock, and it was all amazing. It was May 1997. It was after 18 years of Tory rule. It was a young, fresh-faced Tony Blair with his genius of a chancellor called Gordon Brown, and they'd invented something called the third way. They'd found a magic formula by which, in future, we could finance new public projects, and it was all going to be absolutely fine and dandy. I think that Prescott called it the public-private partnership, but that didn't quite somehow stick. So they became known as PFIs, Private Finance Initiatives. And it was a way of getting spending on new hospitals. And to be fair, Labour said they would increase our spending on the National Health Service and bring us up to the European average. In fact, they went beyond that. They spent more than that. But it was done with private companies building hospitals, running hospitals, and then charging service charges and interest for the years to come. It was actually an incredibly clever way, back in 97, to get government spending off the public balance sheet, to keep us within an annual 3% deficit, which at the time mattered to Blair hugely because he wanted us, if you remember, to join the euro. So we had to be kept below that 3% level. But what nobody really understood with this magical, mystical third way is that at some point in time there would be a price to pay. So a report that has come out today has said that the NHS is leaking money to private companies, and indeed £831 million of profits have been made by private companies out of the National Health Service over the course of the last 6 years, which, I hear you say, is outrageous. But, of course, the Department of Health defend it by saying it's only 3% of the NHS budget. But we have to perhaps ask ourselves a very big question here. That does the private sector, whether these deals are right or not, the bigger question is, should the private sector have a role to play in the National Health Service? Could the private sector, could perhaps even elements of private insurance, bring in efficiencies, bring in cost savings? Or should the National Health Service, as its name implies, be a state-run organisation that is not only free at the point of use for everybody in this country, but is funded purely by the state? And that's the question. And I know that it's one that vexes huge numbers of people in this country. And Josh in Weston-super-Mare is the first of them. Good afternoon, Josh.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm very well, but I have to say, I do remember 97. I do remember that music. Things can only get better, and being told that somehow this third way, was like a magic formula, Josh, that had been plucked out of the air. It's proved, I think, to be anything but.
Yeah, I think you may be right there, but I suppose the points I want to make really is PFI and then there's outsourcing, and I think they're two very separate issues. Completely disagree with the concept of PFI. I think it's a bit of a misnomer and it's a very inefficient way of operating the country. But the general concept of outsourcing to the private sector in general is something I really strongly support. I think the NHS as a whole needs to be run more like a business as opposed to a money machine. It's the public sector are extremely inefficient in general. They're known to be relatively inefficient in the way they operate. Whether that's true or not,
why, Josh?
I'm not sure.
Why?
I think it's just. Well, I think it's. If I'm honest, I think it's civil service mentality, and it's historic and it's legacy, and it does need changing. I know in certain agencies and departments of the government that has changed and that has improved, but you still see it. You still see it within the public sector, and I think when a business is there to make money, they're going to operate it much more efficiently. But as you've seen with the rail being operated by private organisations, it's not being done efficiently, and I think that's all down to how the contracts are administrated.
Well, certainly, Josh. I mean, there is a point you make about the civil service and bureaucracy that I agree with wholeheartedly, because it's absolutely right that when Blair promised he would increase spending on the NHS, he did more than he promised. Massive increases in expenditure, but where did the money go? An extraordinary deal with our GPs that led to many of them being extraordinarily well paid, and a 44% growth in middle management positions within the National Health Service. So no one doubts that New Labour kept their pledge to increase spending on the National Health Service. The question is, did it actually reach the patients? And so I do get your point that there are perhaps inefficiencies within the public sector. And yet, what is interesting about this is that at every election, certainly the last 3 or 4 elections, the Labour Party say, vote for us, because the evil Tories will privatise the National Health Service, when actually Blair's government did more to introduce private elements to our health service than any other government. There are shades, I think, Josh, from Labour of real hypocrisy here.
Yeah, I can agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I do kind of maintain my view that election campaigns aren't the best way to judge a party and how they're going to operate. And actually, most parties, my view anyway, is that they are focused on the next 5 years. They're not focused on the long-term future
that's probably
of the country.
True.
It's all about what they can achieve over the next 5 years until the next election.
No, I'm sure that's right. But Josh, your basic point is that outsourcing can work. So what Josh is saying, folks, is that, let's say for argument's sake, it costs £5,000 per patient to perform a certain kind of operation, and there's a waiting list. If the private hospital down the road, round the corner, can do that operation for £3,500, save money and reduce the waiting list, that's an efficient way to run our health service. Josh, that's your point, yeah?
Absolutely, and it's outsourcing. It's outsourcing work, not just to private hospitals, but to other organisations as well.
Josh, I thank you very much for your call. Now, folks, tell me that Josh from Weston-super-Mare is wrong. Tell me that it's bad, that it's evil to use the private sector in any way in our National Health Service, when he's put to you that proposition that there are times when the private sector can be used to perform operations cheaper than a National Health Service hospital can do it. One thing I know for certain is that in France, they do this kind of thing all the time. So I think I go with Josh Totally. I don't think the PFI deals were a good deal. I think it was frankly a way of fiddling the books. But I think Josh is right. I think the private sector does have a role. I think outsourcing can make the whole thing cheaper and more efficient. Tell me I'm wrong on 0345 60 60 973. Andrew is calling from Docklands. Andrew, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon, Nigel. So I think my view on this is that what I'm very worried about when they say get the private sector involved is they give the private sector some sort of a cartel or monopoly position within the NHS. That's the wrong way to do it. What you do is give the patients the option to take the money that they would have being spent on that operation that the NHS, say, for instance, can't give them for 18 months and take that money elsewhere and find a solution themselves with that money, something like a voucher system.
A voucher system, yeah.
The money. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that way you bring the competition back and the NHS has to buck its ideas up.
Yeah, Andrew, whether it's done through a voucher, whether it's done by a hospital, as I say, speaking of the one round the corner, I don't think that really matters. What you're saying is it would be quicker and cheaper, and that's the point, yeah?
Yes, that's it. People, if you've got a hip operation and you're hobbling around, or you've got some other terrible ailment that isn't necessarily an urgent, life-threatening thing, you want to get it sorted so you can become a functioning, member of society again and can carry on working. And having seen people go through those kind of knee operations, hip operations, and these sort of things, and it takes forever to do them. And I just think that the NHS, there's not really its real position, And if you look at most of the reasons the NHS was set up, most of the diseases that would kill you, 70 years ago or 80 years ago, 90 years ago, you can get a take.
No, that's right. And there weren't hip operations, and there weren't stents in hearts and all that. Andrew, you've made the point very clearly. Folks, Josh and Andrew, my first two callers, take a position that I find myself now in absolute agreement with, which is, yes, actually, it is right at times for the National Health Service, free at the point of use, for they themselves to outsource and use private contractors if it reduces the cost and shortens waiting times. Tell me I'm wrong. This is Nigel Farage on LBC. It's 4:15. It all seemed a wonderful, brave new world as Tony Blair walked into Downing Street in May 1997 with a new, magical third way. It was called the PFI, the Private Finance Initiative, and it was going to give us bright, shiny, new hospitals all over the country. Would you know what? To be fair to Tony Blair, it did. There were lots and lots of new hospitals built. Trouble is, there was something in the small print about service charges and interest and all the rest of it. And a report that's out today says that over the course of the last 6 years, private companies have made profits of £851 million out of these PFI deals. And I'm asking you, is it right? PFI aside, but is it, because I think it's been very difficult for anyone to ring up today to defend PFI, but maybe you're out there, maybe you've been involved in one of these deals and you think it has been worth the money, in which case call me on 0345 60 60 973. But there is a bigger, broader question. Is it ever right for private money or private services to be used in national healthcare provision, or should the National Health Service be absolutely free, not just at the point of use, but run completely by the state? And so far, our callers have said that they think outsourcing is a good idea if operations can be performed more quickly, cheaply and easily somewhere else. So let us know what you think. You can text us on 84850. You can tweet us on @LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC. Give us your views. Next time going to Anne in Burgess Hill. Anne, good afternoon. Does outsourcing make sense?
Good afternoon to you, Nigel. No, it doesn't. I've been around trying to look at different health and saving hospitals over a number of years. And even today I hear now GPs are being asked not to refer people to hospitals and consultants for appointments. There's a price to pay for these private finance initiatives. And who's paying it? Not the people who thought it up.
But hang on,
Anne.
Anne.
Very well.
Anne.
But it's the users. We had an orthopaedic
and GPs being encouraged not to refer people on to consultants at hospitals is simply a function, is it not, of the hospitals being literally at breaking point when it comes to capacity. It's not to do with private money, is it?
Nigel, why are they struggling with capacity? Because a lot of units have been closed.
I'll tell you why, Anne.
I'm sorry, it's so easy.
I'll tell you why, Anne. It's even easier than that. It's because our population is rising by over 500,000 people every single year.
That is right, Nigel. I cannot disagree with you, and that's why a lot of people have been very angry, and I am as well, because we haven't thought about it. But if we saw the huge cost of outsourcing, what happens is, and it happened on the orthopaedic side, we had private unit. But they only did the more cosmetic operations. If it was serious or went wrong, straight back into the NHS. We were delighted to get that back into the NHS. And then the CCG's outsourced. A lot of money is being wasted. We had a lovely scheme for patients with chronic conditions, and I went to one. Before I knew where I was, they'd actually got a license to a scheme from America called, it was supporting patients. But there's a license that's paid for something that we already had and produced with our own staff. I'm not in the NHS, but you know that staff who provided these wonderful support systems. What is the issue, Nigel, is that there are a lot of people out there who've been through universities and are well educated who suddenly come in with all these wonderful ideas. The private finance initiative is just one example, and they're not accountable because they've moved on by the time it's all in place.
That's absolutely true. Look, Anne, please, do understand me. I am not defending the private finance initiatives. Frankly, I think it was a way of fiddling the balance sheets and the books, and has led to a very bad long-term price. I'm not defending that at all. What I'm asking you, Anne, as somebody that has looked at this and studied this and seen this, is, for argument's sake, you know, if your local National Health Hospital in Haywards Heath, or whatever your nearest one is, down there in Sussex, if they could go and use a private hospital in, let's say, Brighton, and get hip replacements done there, cheaper than they can do it themselves, and to reduce patient waiting times, what's not to like about that?
I'm not sure about the cheaper they can do it. My own experience, you know, of people, I can honestly say, and in my family, is that the NHS does take greater care. The private hospitals, you're in and out very quickly.
Yes, I know.
The way it works, I can't tell you over the radio because I don't want to cast any aspersions on people who are trying to do their jobs. But actually, my own friend has had 3 hip operations because it's not now done by the NHS. So because of this, we get them in, we get them on their feet, we get them out because we don't want them in beds too long. It's actually costly.
Well, Anne, you know, I've had, my medical notebook is considerably long, and I've had major operations both within the National Health Service and within the private sector too, and you're quite right. You know, the private sector is not perfect, and certainly, you know, if I'm an emergency case with a serious, life-threatening, immediate problem, the National Health Service is where I would want to be every single time. But my own experience, Anne, of elective surgery is that if I go somewhere else, I can get it done more quickly. Now, I've done that because I've been insured, or in some cases I paid the bill myself. But I mean, what you're saying to me is that in some cases the private system is being used not to reduce cost or time, but literally they're closing down departments in the National Health Service to have it done somewhere else. Is that the point you're making?
Well, I think they are, and they're also losing a lot of the expertise and the staff, the dedication. You can't buy it. You can't buy the commitment and the skills. I do have concerns, and I'm afraid I've watched it a long time, and you have to say, okay, on today, this looks like it's going to save you money. Like the closure of all the local authority homes that took in older people, they provided the care. They were well run, and there was a good salary and career structure.
So, Anne,
now,
what would your solution be?
Authorities are terrified. Hospital beds are so occupied because we haven't got the facilities, because at the time, we don't need that. We've got a new way of doing it.
So what would you do, Anne?
What would I do? Well, I would develop we developed one in Haywards Heath when we had a wonderful primary care trust. We developed the Well, I think you have to bring back the cottage hospitals.
Yeah.
But also, we had the intermediate care centre, which is what you call step-down beds. Or in Germany, it'd be convalescent homes, and you know how good it is on the continent. So they wouldn't be occupying the hospital beds at that great cost.
Okay.
That's freed up. But what you have is those other beds before you send them home, so they don't have to be returned to the hospital too quickly.
And thank you for your call. Thank you for your concerns. And they're concerned that outsourcing actually could be used as a means, effectively, of losing expertise and closing down facilities within the National Health Service. And I wouldn't want that. My argument, and the reason I supported the first two callers on outsourcing, is I think it could bring cost savings and time efficiencies if done properly. And we stay in the county of Sussex and go to Kevin in Uckfield. Kevin, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Nigel. I was driving along, I've pulled over now, and I have to say I wasn't prepared argumentatively to make this phone call.
Right.
But by way of background, I have for 30 years owned a company that manufactures and designs hospital operating theatre air conditioning equipment.
Right.
And my alert on the PFI initiative has been that the very sensible and required standards that were afforded under the NHS have been disregarded under the PFI initiative to provide for increased profitability for the developers.
So you're arguing that not only has PFI had an horrendous long-term cost, but it's lowered standards. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. Oh, there is no question. I've seen it with my own eyes. My company has been engaged to conduct surveys on this equipment.
Interesting. Well,
poor.
Kevin,
it's very poor.
Kevin, with your 30 years of experience in this, I'm not going to fight against you one little bit. And I'm very pleased that you have pulled over and told us that, because that brings a whole new element to it. Not just expensive, but badly done. Kevin, are there any circumstances in which outsourcing, using the private sector, or perhaps insurance, could be of benefit to the National Health Service?
If you contrast a properly designed and constructed NHS facility against those that were built under the PFI, I can say, because I also work in the private sector, my company works in the private sector, that the vast majority, and I won't quote the names, of the private sector hospitals are built fully compliant with the HTMs, which is the Hospital Technical Memoranda.
Okay.
So my argument there is I would have far more comfort having an operation on my shoulder in a private hospital than one that has been built under a PFI.
Interesting. Kevin, that is a fascinating point, and thank you so much for pulling over and telling us that. Kevin from Uckfield, thank you very much indeed. So Kevin bringing a whole new dimension in there, saying that Blair's wonderful new plan for PFIs has actually lowered standards, and he would have more confidence having an orthopaedic operation in a private hospital. I've never heard that argument before. I think it is somewhat alarming. I'm Nigel Farage, standing in for Ian Dale on Drive at LBC. The time is 4:30. It's 20 years since we started the private finance initiatives with our hospitals, and today a report says the NHS is leaking money to these private companies. Indeed, they've made profits of £851 million out of NHS buildings over the course of the last 6 years. And I've yet to find a caller, I've yet to find a texter, a tweeter, anybody that will defend these PFI deals that were struck back in the late 1990s. Indeed, our last caller, who'd spent 30 years producing medical equipment, said that he felt under PFI deals, not only had they proved to be expensive, but the standards in theatres had fallen as well. So that's one thing we're talking about. And more broadly, though, we're saying, are there cases where the private sector, through outsourcing or perhaps private medical insurance, could be of value to healthcare provision in this country, or should the National Health Service be purely run by the state? And Wendy says to me on Twitter, PFI should not be confused with normal privately run enterprise. The terms of PFI contracts are scandalous. Wendy, you're another one. Please, somebody out there tell me, PFI was a genius idea. Mr. Blair, if you're listening, it's 0345 60 60 973. I'm going next to a doctor, George from Basildon. George, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Nigel. It's a pleasure speaking to you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming on as a professional working in the industry. Now, nobody, George, has had a good word to say about PFI, and indeed, you know, my last caller, who makes medical instruments, was worried about standards in theatres. But, George, would you as a doctor advocate at times outsourcing, say, a hip replacement?
Right. I feel very passionate here about it. That's why I had to call you in. If I wanted to earn more money and do private, then I would have stayed where I was a few years ago. And believe me, I was earning 4 times as much. I came here because I believed in the system. I believed in the NHS. I wanted to be part of the team. It's something like playing God, so to say. Now, one of my observations has been that there's going to be a conflict of interest. Why would you, as a surgeon or as a doctor or as a physician, treat a patient in the NHS when you know the same patient will give you an extra bit of benefit, like sort of a cherry on the cake, something, whatever you want to call that, in the private, the same afternoon, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow, maybe next week? And, you know, that's one of the things. Then again, I have felt that there is sort of a, if not exactly like a gang culture, but it is like a feeling of an elite group working in the private. So, you know, your colleagues among you, like, you know, if you have like 30 people in the department and 10 are working in private as a group, they have sort of an extra relationship. I have nothing against it, but they kind of sort of discriminate, if that's a very harsh word, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And it feels like the rest of the people working in the NHS are the unfortunate, inefficient lot left behind. And if you outsource the things, are you giving the message to the people remaining in the back is that you lot are not doing as good as we do outside in another hospital?
I don't think so, George. I don't think so. I mean, look, come on, we all know. Now, because our mainstream politicians would never say this, but we all know, and you must see it as a doctor in the NHS, that our population is going through the roof. That the pressures on everything from GPs to accident and emergencies and on to, you know, waiting times for operations or whatever it may be, Wales particularly, I think has the longest list now in the whole of the UK. You know, we all know the NHS is under massive pressure. I mean, you know, if one of my relations, George, you know, an elderly relation was in pain, needed a hip replacement, and if I felt the NHS outsourced that to a private hospital, saved him 6 months of waiting, and perhaps got it done at a cheaper price, I'd be delighted, George.
Yes, but then again, there are loopholes into the unfortunately, in the system. This is, again, my observation, and I stand to be corrected, that if you know your GP, if you know the surgeon, you can twist the system, all right? You can be on top of the list. Now, one more thing I would like to highlight.
But that's hardly the advocacy for a good, fair system for everybody, is it?
No, it's this is again my observation, and
sure.
I can be wrong. You know, now one of the other things is that whenever you do some procedure, something in the private hospital, there's no backup for a complication. So the patients end up in the NHS for dealing with your mess up in the private clinic. And there is no round-the-clock care in the private hospitals. There are essentially no doctors there. There is no multidisciplinary service provided over there. So you may see a surgeon who's working in the NHS from 8 to 5. So he will only be able to come and see you next day, 6 p.m., if anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Or you will be transferred to the main NHS hospital. I mean, I'm sorry, but it has so many problems, so many issues. You need to sort it out one way or the other.
Okay, George. No, I take your point. I take your point, George, and I'm also fascinated at the level of personal sacrifice that you've made financially to defend the NHS. If I gave you, George, a blank sheet of paper, if I said to you, tomorrow, George, you are replacing Jeremy Hunt, you are in charge of Britain's National Health Service, where would you start? What would you do?
any NHS hospital, any department, any coffee room I'll take you to, believe me, 90% of the time people are talking about the stresses they are undergoing, the kind of pressures they are working under. Nobody comes and talks to them. Nobody sorts them out. All the managers or the top ranks have to do is all they can do is shuffle you around. So instead of you doing the Tuesday, you have to do the Wednesday. I mean, I've been very fortunate that I've never had to do it, but I know colleagues who have had to do these things. These are small, tiny things maybe for you, but if I have childcare problems, for example, and I like doing night shifts only, that I did like for 6 months, and if you came and said, no, everybody has to do day shifts as well, tomorrow onwards you will do the day shifts. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I'll have to quit the job. So, somebody has to sit down and talk to the people grassroots level. The nurses are living by the hundreds, by the thousands, whatever, and going into bank and going into locum agencies, why? And they are still working in the same hospital. So, number one, we need to look into the salaries.
So you're saying it's very badly run, George, aren't you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I in trouble?
No, you're being frank, and you're someone who cares hugely about it. And look, I mean, come on, a lot of our taxpayers' money goes into this system, and unless people are prepared to be constructively critical, which is what you're doing, and advocating a better way forward, then things can't change. What is morale like, George, in the NHS? In the last decade that I've been here, I felt it's go down like way too much now. And it's not only, it's not about the money only. Yes, for some people it may be about the money, but it's mostly about how people are being treated from the inside and from the outside. What's the public's perception being projected by the media or by the people, by the politicians, whoever. Every day NHS is in the media for some wrong reasons. We are really under a lot of stress. We are really, I'm proud to say that my colleagues are really, really working hard, trying to make ends meet, trying to keep their patients safe and care for them. But there's so much more that can be done. Believe me, somebody really needs to look into it, and it can all be sorted. Okay, I'll give you an example. We were having problems with the finances and some issues with the delays in clinics and stuff like that. Guess which company did we hire to look into the medical side of the efficiency? Euro Car Parts. Can you believe that? I'm sorry, but you're telling. It may be the same. They are under the same umbrella. They are not selling parts, of course. But Sure.
What I'm trying to say is that they came in and they are telling people that no, while you are sitting and waiting for the doctor to examine the patient, you are not doing anything. So they are telling the nurses, you can go out and look at the other patients. It doesn't work like that. It's not a car, on the jack or something.
No.
Do you understand what I
Okay.
mean?
No, George, you've made a very passionate and very personal argument in favour of a well-run, state-funded National Health Service, and I thank you very much for your call. And I think on behalf of all of us, thank goodness, George, there are people like you out there, is all I can say, and thank you very much indeed for calling. Well, George saying, don't outsource, fix the problems. But I thought the longer that call went on, the more worried I got about the way, actually, that our hospitals are being run. Whether that... it sounds to me, George, like there's a hell of a lot that needs fixing. For the moment, I personally still feel happy that if we do outsource operations, we can save money and save time. That is very much my view. But I mean, please tell me I'm wrong. 0345 6060 973. I'm Nigel Farage, here on LBC, standing in for Ian Dale, and the time is 4:45. The report out today says the National Health Service is leaking millions in PFI contracts. I'm asking you, is there any role for the private sector in the National Health Service? And we've not had a single person who has defended PFI deals, both in terms of what their long-term cost has been, but also some hints that perhaps in PFI hospitals, some things in theatres, etc., were built to slightly lower standards. On the more general debate, a lot of you think, and I think, that outsourcing operations at times can reduce patient waiting times and perhaps reduce costs too, but some impassioned calls, including George there, a doctor working in a hospital in Essex, saying, look, it's all well and good doing that, but we need to fix the National Health Service, in which everybody is working under extreme pressure with morale falling. There is a very real problem here. John is my next caller. He's from Sheffield. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Just a bit of a background. One of the things that you said about Labour introducing PFI, it was originally introduced by Norman Lamont in 1992.
I was waiting. I was waiting for someone to say that. They did do it in a very limited way. Labour then did it in a very big way. But you're absolutely factually correct, John. Yes.
And Jesse Norman, the MP, the Tory MP, wrote a brilliant paper saying it's a bad idea. So it's funny that Blair picked it up again. Okay.
He didn't just pick it up. He actually made it a sort of flagship that this was the way in which, we were going to get shiny new hospitals. But no, John, on historical fact, you're absolutely right.
Okay. Now, just on a couple of things. One, I'm absolutely against outsourcing. For example, they outsourced the cleaning, and the MRSA bug came in, and they had a huge problem over that, and that's because cleaning was outsourced. There's things like Circle took over Hinchinbrook Hospital, found it couldn't pay, handed it back to the NHS.
Yep.
Virgin has got a whole swathe of NHS projects. It has yet to make a profit. Virgin has yet to make a profit.
John, when, for example, a cleaning contract is outsourced, is that in effect privatisation through the back door?
Well, it is, isn't it? Because you're paying an outside company to do something there that the nurse did as part of her daily routine and knew exactly how to do it. And that the orderlies and that, they knew the standards. They were overseen by the nursing staff themselves, and they weren't there to cut costs, which is what normally happens with these private firms, is they look at the costs first.
John, you seem to know a bit about this subject. Have you been involved in healthcare yourself?
No, I've only been involved in healthcare as a patient. I'm what they call a live kidney donor.
Right.
So
okay.
I was on the inside for over a year.
Yeah.
And the hospital treatment was fantastic in the Sheffield Hallamshire Hospital here.
Yeah.
It really was amazing. What is wrong with the NHS is the management. It's the way they manage things. Things like targets, the constant insistence on funding, and Jeremy Hunt plays the bully boy like a lot of CEOs do of large companies. Is their biggest weapon is the money. So he all the time he focuses on the money, and he says we've got to cut costs. Well, actually, if you try and cut costs, the costs go up because you make mistakes, and then you have to repair them.
So, right? John, should we bring in? It's been talked about before. Should we bring in some dynamic business entrepreneur who set up a huge organisation with tens of thousands of employees?
No.
Right. I thought you might say that.
There's one guy. Once you fire Jeremy Hunt, then
right. So he's got to go, is he? Hunt's got to go. Yeah.
He's got to go. He's an utter incompetent.
Right.
The person you've got to get in is Don Berwick.
Tell us more.
Don Berwick has been an advisor to a number of. I think he was an advisor to David Cameron at the time. But he's a medical expert. He is a doctor himself.
Yep.
He's run a brilliant system of Medicare, and he's a great fan of what this guru called Dr. Deming said, which is if you improve the quality, the care goes up and the costs go down. So focus on getting better and better at what you're doing, finding where there's waste, finding where there are delays, get rid of them.
Okay.
And that works. And Berwick is still around in this country. Why don't they give him Hunt's job? I can't believe it.
Oh, well, firstly, he's not an elected MP, and we generally choose people in Parliament to run these things. John, you may or may not be right. Either way, a fascinating call. I'm heading down to Folkestone next on the South Coast. John, does the NHS work? Does outsourcing make sense?
The NHS doesn't work. It will never work. It's a nationalised industry, and like all nationalised industries, are badly managed and have extremely poor outcomes for the customer. So
right. So you're pretty down on the NHS.
What I think is that after the war, the NHS was essential. We were bombed back to the Stone Age almost, and everything was nationalised then.
Yep.
And it was essential, and we've moved on from there. That's the last century. This century, our expectations of our healthcare have changed. We have automatically, or originally, if you wanted a pair of glasses, you had to have National Health. If you wanted your teeth done, you had to have it under National Health.
Mm-hmm.
Today, if you want a pair of glasses, you go down the high street, there's 2 or 3 private shops, we pay up front, we don't query, well, we all moan about it, but we all pay our money up front. And likewise with our teeth, we have used private dentists, and we pay our money up front. You can have private dental care. People are prepared to do it. There's no problem. We have chemists. They are private businesses. We don't have a problem there. We don't have a problem with the dentist. We don't have a problem with our glasses. And yet, as soon as you mention privatisation...
Oh, everyone screams.
Everybody goes,
yeah, it's awful. It's wicked. It's evil. I know.
Now, in France, they have a 2-tier system.
Yep.
70% is paid for by the state, 30% is topped up with private healthcare insurance.
Yes.
And it works.
Do you know what, John?
I've been treated in France, and it's fantastic.
Do you know what, John? When you look at the numbers and you compare whether it's stroke, cancer or heart attack, and you compare our rates with France's, there is no doubt about one thing, John, they are streets ahead of us.
Ahead, and also, if you see a consultant in France, it costs me 30 euros. Eh?
Yep.
What? And your feet don't touch the ground. You have a scan. You go in. You have the scan. You come out of there, getting dressed. Here's the result. Immediate.
Amazing.
Now, why is that? Why is that?
So, John, your basic point is we've already introduced private competition in glasses, dentistry, many other things, and that actually a bit of private competition is no bad thing.
It's brilliant. And the NHS in its current form will never, ever work. It's nationalised, it's run by politicians, and I always think anything run by politicians is doomed.
on that note, John, I'll thank you for your call. My last caller on this subject, and I'm back to Sheffield, and it's Joe. Joe, good afternoon.
Hi, Nigel. I want to say, there should be a Chinese wall between the NHS and privatization.
Yep.
They should not be meeting each other. And I want the NHS should be really, really public funds and publicly managed, but the private sector should come in and bring in fresh capital, should build in big hospitals. There's the clientele there. There are the footballers, the bankers, the artists, the actresses. There's a market for private healthcare in England, but they don't need to be parasitic or be parasites on the NHS funds and all that. So there should be a Chinese wall that partitions the NHS public funds directly separate from the private sector.
Right, so keep the things completely separate, Joe. Your argument, keep the things completely separate. And, private healthcare, actually, it's a very good source of income. London and the South East is earning for this country well over £1 billion a year in people coming in from all over the world to have healthcare and operations here. Joe from Sheffield, my final caller on the subject. Joe thinks the two should be kept absolutely separate. Well, moving on, after the news, North Korea, it's unavoidable, isn't it? And Theresa May today is in Japan, visiting Prime Minister Abe, and she said that China offers the best hope of pulling North Korea back from the brink. Interestingly, she's refused to rule out the United Kingdom using our own cyber-offensive capabilities against North Korea. Either way, there is international support. The UN Security Council have condemned the firing of the missile as outrageous, so is China our only hope of preventing nuclear war with Korea? The number to call is 0345 60 60 973.